So they leverage their network of investors to engage the largest listed companies on the topic of climate change. So since then, we've grown into a global environmental not-for-profit organization operating from a clear vision, which is to build an economy that truly works for both people and the planet. To follow this vision, we started with the mission of focusing investors, companies, cities, states, and regions to drive urgent action towards a truly sustainable economy by measuring and understanding, or better yet, managing their environmental impacts. So on this slide, how does the CDP system work? So on behalf of investors here on the left and purchasing organizations, we request the listed organizations and suppliers to measure and develop understanding about their impacts, also the exposure to certain risks, and ultimately to take action and improve the strategy, the environmental strategy. And we work with these two different authorities that request companies for their data on the topics of climate change, water security, and deforestation. So instead of reporting to CDP, I think it's more accurate to say reporting via CDP. Here on the slide, you can see an overview of our most important stakeholders. So again, in the last 20 years, CDP has really grown its network. And we now this year work together with 590 institutional investors and lenders, work together 110 trillion US dollars in assets, and 200 supply chain members with a combined purchasing power of $5.5 trillion US dollars. And these authorities, indeed, they request data from companies. And in 2020, combined, we had more than 10,000 unique entities responding to CDP. And this is taking together companies, cities, states, and regions. So all these stakeholders from around the globe use our platform, data, and insights to make better informed decisions. We hold the largest and most comprehensive set of environmental data, and we are the only reporting platform and scoring methodology that is publicly available, transparent, and also run under a charitable mission. As Brian already mentioned, we're really seen as the golden standard for environmental reporting. And this is exactly why we have seen such a steady increase annually. You can see on the graph here that we indeed started with a focus on climate change and emissions data, and later extending our focus to cover also the key issues surrounding water scarcity and deforestation. In the future, likely, we are going to add further environmental topics, including, for example, air and biodiversity. And the focus is increasingly going to be on making the transition to a truly sustainable economy. So as said, we collect data at the moment still for 3 different questionnaires. And here you can see the different modules. But my colleagues from Clearstream will go a little bit more into detail in this later. But I highlighted here the modules that are aligned amongst each other, but also these are the modules, so the dark gray here on the slide are the ones that are aligned with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, so the TCFD. So this means that responding to the CDP questionnaire really helps you prepare for TCFD reporting and also regulatory developments. So yeah, responding to one or more of these questionnaires will ensure that the investors and customers receive your data in a comparable and standardized format and ready for them to analyze. And also, I wanted to show this climate, forest, water nexus because it's important to understand why we are focusing on these 3 themes. The nexus on this slide basically shows that water, climate, and forests are all deeply interlinked. And this is valid for the challenges that we are facing, but also to consider when we think about solutions. And here also, these numbers kind of back the arguments of why you should start managing your risks as soon as possible, because we found that 210 of the biggest global companies taken together report almost $1 trillion US dollars at risks from climate impacts in the next 5 years. And then 40% shortfall of the available global water supply is expected already as soon as 2030. And then also 15% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions result from deforestation and forest degradation. And then I want to share a bit of information on the different CDP data users. So it's important to note that these are not just coming from the financial community, but or the purchasing organizations, but it feeds into many different areas, such as civil society, the academic community, policy, decision making, and of course the business community. And then a bit more specifically, here you can see where CDP stands in the ESG ecosystem. So it's important to keep in mind that one public response to CDP goes into many hands across financial markets, but also ESG research and rating providers. So a lot, let's say most of the ESG raters license data from CDP and use this in their analysis. And CDP is really seen, of course, as the raw data. So then to conclude, a quick summary of the benefits of responding to CDP. So first of all, it will improve your reputation and really help you gain competitiveness as an organization. And then starting the disclosure journey, as we call it, will help you strengthen your stakeholder communication. It will help you be prepared for regulatory developments as CDP continues to, engage with policymakers. And of course, the TCFD alignment. And also it will allow you to use the platform as a guiding framework for you to help you inform your environmental strategy. And then here I have the timeline for 2021. As most of you know, the online response system is currently open. We have a European and global workshop coming up on May 20th. And then on the 28th of July is the submission deadline for scoring. That was it from my side. I believe I'm handing over to Gavin for the next part.
Yeah, thanks, thanks Muriel. If you just stop sharing there, I'll share my screen.
Yeah, one moment. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so so I'm Gavin Whittaker with Clearstream Solutions, and just I suppose to take the next step from where Muriel left off, I'm going to look at a little bit of an overview of the questionnaires, look at some of the classification or sector classifications, and also look at admin fees and that type of thing, and then I'm going to look at just getting started with your CDP response. So I know on the call we have a mixture of some seasoned companies who've been responding for many years, and we have some people who are considering responding, and maybe some who've responded about a year ago. So the same thing actually applies, that normally when we've completed the CDP questionnaire, people are usually a little bit tired and emotional from getting it over the line, and they don't tend to think too much about the overview about getting started. So by refreshing everyone's memory of how to do this, it can actually be quite helpful, because people only start to really focus in on CDP around now and when the system opens, sometimes, as I said, even the most seasoned professionals forget a little bit about some of the procedures about getting started. So just to pick up on the timeline, the 28th of July, again, as a reminder, because people do tend to forget, the submission date was later last year because of the pandemic. So for this year, it's been pulled back to the end of July. And some of the people who've been responding for many years will remember that it used to be the end of June, but for this year, it's the end of July. So I think that's an important date to have written down. And normally, it's just handy to work back from there. So particularly internally, if you need to get the questionnaire approved or reviewed by anyone else, if you allow a week or so for that, and then just work back your timelines for how you're going to get it finished and how you're going to get it completed. That's a useful way of doing it. The questionnaires itself, Grania is going to be going through the climate change questionnaire, but it's no harm to just to highlight the fact that in any reporting cycle, there's actually 3 different questionnaires. So the one we usually talk about, which is climate change, most people will be familiar with this. It concerns entering in your emissions data and other climate-related governance, etc., risk and opportunities. And the climate change questionnaire is also, and again, there can be a bit of confusion because there's actually a 4th questionnaire, but the climate change questionnaire is also the basis for the supply chain questionnaire. So anybody on the call who is only being requested or will only be requested to do the supply chain, what you're actually doing is filling out the climate change questionnaire and a supply chain module at the end. For those people who normally fill out the climate change questionnaire and are also asked to do the supply chain, you just fill out your climate change questionnaire as normal and you will answer the supply chain module at the end. It's easy to forget because most people focus on climate change that there are 2 other questionnaires, water security, which obviously it concerns water on a broader level. And there are water questions on the climate change questionnaire, but you can report, for example, emissions from your water use. But the water security is broader than that and will look at sort of water usage on a facility level. A lot of companies will be requested to do climate change. They may or may not be requested to do water. They may or may not be requested to do forest. Some of them, it's voluntary. But I would urge you to consider it. I mean, as we move through various CDP cycles, these other questionnaires are going to become more and more important. So a bit like the climate change one, the sooner you start, the easier it is to get better at it. So at the moment in Ireland, there's only 1 company who replies to all 3, and that's Smurfit Kappa Group. However, there is a significant number of companies now who will do climate change in water or climate change in forest. The forest questionnaire isn't, there's a little bit of misconception sometimes. It's not about owning forests. It's not about being, having a forest in your portfolio or within your organization. So it tends to focus on commodities, but within your supply chain, there may be elements that are putting risk on commodities such as timber, palm oil, soy, and cattle. So indirectly, there may be pressure on the world's forests. So what I would urge you to do, if you're not going to include it for this year, certainly have a look at it and certainly try and get started if you can, because they will become more prevalent. So the other aspect of CDP, which some people are aware of and some people aren't, is the the alignment with TCFD. So for those who aren't familiar with TCFD, in about 2015, the Financial Stability Board, chaired by Mark Carney, set up the TCFD and put in charge Michael Bloomberg. To basically, their mandate was to develop a set of voluntary, financial relevant climate disclosure recommendations that could promote informed investment, credit and insurance underwriting decisions that could in turn enable stakeholders to better understand assets exposed to climate related risks. So If you're in the financial world, certainly adhering to TCFD is recommended, and it's now required, I think, in the UK, to have alignment with it. So it's very convenient, the fact that the CDP actually aligns with the TCFD and has implemented its recommendations. So when you look, Gráinne will be talking a bit more detail about governance, about strategy, about risk management, and about metrics and targets. When you're filling out those sections, they're aligned with the requirements for TCFD. So that's very useful, because a lot of organizations are also considering this as well, or doing it in conjunction. So one will assist the other. Whichever one you start, you can use CDP as a roadmap for TCFD, or if for some reason you've already started TCFD, you can then use that data and information and just port it into your CDP response. The other area that some companies get a little bit confused about and are not aware of is, and again, it was part of a TCFD recommendation, which was to have a sector-specific approach. So the I can't remember exactly, it was a couple of years ago, the sectors, they started small and they started building out. So what this means is that your organization will be included in a specific sector if that is that part of your business. So I think the rule is that at least 20% of your revenue, if it's from one of these established sectors, then in addition to the general questionnaire, you will have to answer specific questionnaires or questions from the different sectors. So in most cases, your organization probably is in one sector, such as the energy sector, or could be transport, whatever it is. And therefore, you will have to answer those questions. And those additional questions are highlighted, and the specific sector that you're in is highlighted as well. And it does occasionally happen that some companies wonder why they're in a certain sector, and I'll explain that in a minute. However, if you do feel that you are wrongly placed, or your organization is in the wrong sector, it is possible to reach out to CDP and to get clarification on that. And what's interesting here is that within within the climate change questionnaires, sort of, if you look at climate change, water security, and forest, not all of them have sector questions built into them. So, for example, if you look down at agriculture and land use, if you're in paper and forestry, you will answer. If you're doing the climate change response, you will be required to answer additional paper and forestry questions. If you're answering the water, if you're in that same sector and you're answering water security questions, there isn't sector-specific questions for paper and forestry. However, within forests, there is then sector-specific questions within the forest questionnaire. So if your organization is not in any one of these sectors, you will just be required to answer the general questionnaire, regardless of whether you're doing climate change, water, or forest. Basically, the direction of CDP is to add in more sectors and to become more sector specific over time, because that assists then with benchmarking and with asking questions more pertinent to a particular industry. So even if your organization is not in one now, you don't need to worry about it. You just need to fill out the general questionnaire. If you do see sector specific questions popping up, you just need to answer them as best you can, and over time, more and more businesses will be assigned a sector. Speaking of that sector classification system, CDP have what they call the CDP ACS. It operates like other industry classification systems. However, it is different to some of the more standard ones out there. There's various different classification systems, and they're all a little bit different. So this is very simple in that it starts with the industry, and you get classified in whatever industry you're in. It then drills down into activity group, and then into the activity itself, right? So again, if we take food, beverage, and agriculture, that gets split out into food and beverage processing, logging and rubber tapping and tobacco. And then within those areas, there's various specific activities, such as, you know, food processing or very specific type of food processing. So again, just be aware of this. And if you do see sector questions popping up, it may be usually, and for most people, they're in the right one. For some companies who are dealing in lots of different sectors, again, it can get a little bit confusing. What you're, if you do happen, it doesn't happen very often, but if you do happen to be in more than one sector, you get scored on whatever your primary sector questions are. Again, this is something that not a lot of companies think about, and someone just goes in and makes a selection and then doesn't think too much about it after that. So when you are, as if you are requested by CDP to respond, then there is a fee that needs to be paid. And if you are self-selected, you also need to pay a fee. There are some differences if you're a first-time responder, which I'll touch on in a minute. But generally speaking, there are three choices for a fee that needs to be paid. So there's a subsidized fee, which is the lowest amount, which is 925 euros. So this is, I suppose, to enable companies that may find it financially difficult to respond, and it's to allow them to do that. It doesn't cover the full costs of operating the CDP disclosure system for every single company, and funding is accessed from other sources. So this would be a decision that you have to make yourself, and it's based on your own resources and what you think would allow the submission to go through. The standard fee, which is I suppose what most companies I think would choose, covers the full cost of the operating system and contributes to the ongoing maintenance and development of the platform. So this is the usual preferable fee that most companies would choose. I am aware that a number of companies will also choose this enhanced fee, which is obviously a higher amount. However, this does come with additional benefits. So if, as Muriel mentioned, CDP is a not-for-profit organization. So obviously, if whatever fees it gets from the system go on to fund its work and the systems itself. So by choosing the enhanced fee, you are not only helping with the operation of the system, but you are actually contributing to CDP and helping it to develop and become more robust over time. So there are on the website a range of additional benefits that you get by choosing the enhanced fee, such as, you can do analysis of other company responses, you get a benchmarking report, you can use a CDP supporter badge, there's a screening of the suppliers, and there is a consultation, etc. So I think best if you want to understand more about what benefits you get from the enhanced fee, it's no harm to reach out to Muriel, and she will explain that to you and in a bit more detail. Or we can provide you with that. But basically, in order to get started with the system, you need to select a fee. And if you need to get that pre-approved, that's fine. When you go in, you can either pay it in full by credit card, or you can raise an invoice where you can pay it at a later date. In terms of first-time responders, so if you're requested by CDP, it's your first time to respond, then you do have a choice. So you can either fill out, go full into it and do the full response, or you can do a minimum version of the questionnaire. And if you complete the minimum version of the questionnaire, some companies do it, but just to help them get up and running, if they're not maybe comfortable with the process or they're a little unsure about answering some of the questions. And it's important to note that the minimum version is not scored. So by completing the minimum version, you do not get a score at the end. Now, that can suit a lot of companies who simply want to get started, and then on the second year of responding, they may do the full version and get scored. If So if you do the full version of the questionnaire as a first-time responder, you can request that your score is private, so it's not made public. So again, that might be an option rather than doing the minimum version, to do the full version and just keep the score private if that's something that your organization is more comfortable with. If you are requested by, there's an investor request, you're asked to submit to CDP, and there's no fee in the first year of disclosing, and that's regardless of whether you do the minimum version or the maximum version. If you are a self-selected company, so a self-selected company is an organization who's not requested or not asked by CDP directly in an email to respond to the CDP system, but they decide that they want to respond themselves. Then if you are a first-time self-selected company, you do have to pay the fee in the first year, but you are still entitled to do the minimum version if you would like. And I think you can still keep the score private as well. Okay, so that's some of that detail. If you're not clear, or if I wasn't clear about any of it, or if it wasn't clear to you, then you can just reach out to us either via the chat or afterwards, and we can clarify some of those things with you. So in terms of the disclosing platform, when you need to get started, so if you've already responded before, you simply log in and you'll be familiar with it, but it's no harm to just to remind us all, if you're a first-time responder and you come in, it can be a little bit confusing as to where to go and what to do. So the purpose of the slides is to basically explain that. So we divide into two areas here. So there's the response dashboard. On that dashboard, you can see who has what you've been requested to respond to, like what questionnaires. You can go in and confirm your participation. So the first start is to say that you are going to respond before you answer any questions at all. You say, yes, we are going to. A user will need to designate themselves as the main user, and I'll touch on that in a minute. That main user can then add other users with various different permissions. You can, if you've responded before, you can see your previous scores and responses. You can review a previous year's response, and you can access your score reports and guidance tools, etc. When you, from the dashboard, if you go through to the actual response system itself, you will select a questionnaire and you will go through, and this is where you actually do the work on the questionnaire. This is where you actually start filling in or answering the questions. You have a choice of exporting from out to Word, or importing and exporting via Excel. You can view terms and all that kind of thing as well. So these are the two things. I was looking at the questionnaire last night, and when you actually click into it, you will actually, depending on what stage you're at, if you've made selections, this might behave a little differently in that you will see the response dashboard automatically. But I'll just take you through, if you don't see it, if you haven't made any decisions or choices yet, this is how to navigate your way around. So when you log in, you're going to see a little icon here that normally has your initials, and these are the various choices that you can make. And when you click on the response dashboard, you get through to a screen that looks like this. So it'll pop up here and it'll show you your climate change questionnaire, forest and water, if you're choosing those. Again, as I spoke earlier, you can see the drop downs for users, and you can see here that climate change 2020, this one is here, last year's one. And you confirm your participation via clicking on this here. So you should be able to manage everything yourself. You don't need really any assistance, but obviously if you're a little unsure, you can reach out to us. As I said, the first step that you'll need to do is to confirm your participation. So it's fairly well laid out here as to what to do. When you click on it, you'll be asked a number of questions, and that will make sure that you are participating for that year. Within confirming the main user is a very important step. So usually it's the main person who will be responsible for managing the CDP response. They're not necessarily the person who's going to enter all the information, but it is usually somebody who is designated within the organization to have ownership of the CDP response. So you can also have, in addition to the main user, you can assign logins, and you can do that through the dashboard for contributors who can add and edit information. And then you can also designate for certain people in the organization if they have a view only. So they can go in, see the answers, they can read them, but they can't actually change anything. You can see here that the contributors have limited control, particularly over the questionnaire. The main user does all of the main work. So starting the response, making that payment decision we spoke about earlier, answering questions, and very significantly, the main user is the individual who will click on the final submit when the questionnaire is complete. It's been approved by whoever in the organization, and they are the person who will submit the questionnaire. So even though you may have a more senior person within the organization who signs off on the questionnaire and the very final question that you answer, it is regardless, it is the main user who hits submit. And that's an important job, because particularly as you get to the closer to the end of July, that action needs to happen for the questionnaire to be submitted. So if you're new to this, the very first step is understanding who that main user should be, and making sure that that main user gets set up on the system as quickly as possible. Again, this is just a bit more detail on the on the user roles, and I think I covered most of them. The bit I didn't cover was that ongoing, outside of submitting the questionnaire, that main user is the person who will receive communications from CDP. So they will receive reminder emails, an email to confirm the submission, and any sort of other notifications about, perhaps there may be, and it has happened in the past, where there may be a technical issue with the system or the system's been updated. It's the main user who will be notified of all that information. So it is important that, particularly if you're looking at a July submission time, that the main user is available. They're not going off on a month's holidays in July and there's no one to submit the questionnaire, that person is around, or at least has access to the system for the duration of the response cycle. When you actually click into answer the question, and the example here is the climate change question. Again, this is the 2021. So you have a couple of areas here, and there are some new additions for this year as well, I think, as well. So even though there is an autosave function, you do get the choice to save when you've made any changes. Even though there is an autosave function there, I would strongly recommend that when you have completed answered a number of questions or completed a section, and certainly before you log out, I think it's best practice to get in the habit of clicking save. Obviously the submit button is there, and there's a share button which allows you some functions as well. This is an interesting area here where you can import and export. Some organizations like to do that. They like to export out into Excel, pass that document around, get sections of it filled in and import it. You can also export out to Word as well, your last year's response or this year's response, if you want to share it around. Again, this is a decision that needs to be made in terms of how you manage the process. Most people that we would come across would tend to just answer the questionnaire on the system, and then provide access to people who need to read it or need to contribute. It's sometimes easier just to have it in one place, and just to be able to work on a live example of it. And that would be I suppose the best practice that we would see. but any way that you want to operate that yourself, you have choices there. So in terms of the functionalities of the system, if you have responded before and you're coming in to respond for a second year, you will notice that many of the questions that you answered last year have been copied over. So you don't have to start from scratch and write the whole thing itself. So that's an incredibly useful function. And you'll notice that for the first kind of parts of the questionnaire to do with governance and risks and opportunities, that kind of thing, there is some copying over. As mentioned, there's an autosave function which does work, but it is best, I would recommend to use the saving function. You can track the modifications from other users, and there is an audit trail button in there as well, which you can see who changed what if you need to. The exporting and the importing, so you can export to Word, you can export to Excel and re-import from Excel as well. And there is a progress bar, highlights, missing questions, that type of thing. And there is an automatic expansion of text boxes as well, which was added. And again, a lot of this, I would recommend you just get in and practice with. So if you want to export to Word or Excel, just get in and give it a go, and it's fairly straightforward and fairly easy how to do it. There is detailed guidance as well, and anything that we're covering here, there is detailed guidance on the disclosure platform guidelines, but also on the system itself, that you'll be able to look that up. These are very handy tips just to quickly go through. Google Chrome is recommended. There can be issues if you use Safari and other browsers, so I would recommend anyone who's using it to use Google Chrome. If there is a glitch in the system, it does happen from time to time, no need to panic. Just log out, clear your browser, particularly the cache and the cookies, and log back in again. And if there are any issues, you can reach out to the CDP Ireland network, or you can reach out to you can reach out to CDP. We can route it through CDP as well for you. So there's always assistance there. You're never on your own, and there's always somebody there to help. And there is a disclosure platform guideline as well, which you can download, and you can read through all the elements that I've covered there. Again, in addition to what's available in terms of responding, there is guidance on pretty much everything within the CDP system. So whether it's the methodology, whether it's the scoring, whether it's the categories and weights of each of the questions, if you want to deep dive into as much information as makes you happy, it is there. I wouldn't get too bogged down in all of it. Certainly it's recommended to be familiar with the scoring and with the guidance. However, when you are filling out the questionnaire itself, you can click and access the relevant guidance as you're working through the document. You're not expected to spend many a late night working through this in advance. Much of this information here is relevant while you're working through the questionnaire itself. Okay, that is me done. I will...
Gavin, while you're handing over and Gráinne is getting set, there's a question from Kevin, which I'm not sure the latest update on, but if you export to Excel, will it automatically upload to the system when it imported again, I guess? So either Muriel or Gavin.
Yeah. So I don't know if Muriel wants to add to that, but you can upload, so you can answer your questions and upload it using Excel, and it'll populate the relevant questions on the system. I personally have not used it before because for most of the people that we work with, we just enter the information online and set up various people to contribute and to review. But I don't know, Muriel, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, indeed. I would also recommend to work in the online response system, but if the preference is indeed with Excel, then you can export the questionnaire in Excel and then re-import it, but we recommend to do so at the end. So just do one re-import, essentially.
Okay. Gráinne, over to you.
Yeah. So I'm going to give an overview of the questionnaire, just very briefly before we get into the discussion. So this is a snapshot of the different modules in the CDP questionnaire. And I'm going to go through each of these one by one and just give an overview of the different types of questions in each of the modules, but just wanted to show a snapshot. I know it's already been mentioned that the CDP questionnaire is aligned with the TCFD. One of the practical implications of that is that a large portion of the questionnaire is not only about your emissions data, but it's also about your overall climate strategy. So if you look at this here from C5 down to about C10, that's all inputting the numbers of your carbon emissions, your scope 1, 2, 3, if you have any third-party verification, details on your energy consumption. The rest of the questionnaire then is really more so about your overall carbon strategy. So the governance structures you have in place about climate-related issues, how you identify climate-related risks and opportunities, how your business strategy is influenced by climate-related issues, your emission reduction targets and performance on those and emission reduction initiatives, and your engagement externally with stakeholders. So something to note just as you're going through it. But I'll go through each of these now just one by one and just give a brief overview of what's involved in each of the modules. So the introductory module, very simple. So just a brief description of your organization, and you just input some of the necessary admin things. So the year that you're reporting in, the countries you operate in, the currency that you use, etc. So the governance module. So the governance module starts off by asking if you have any board level oversight on climate related issues. If you do, it'll ask you for more detail on that. And then if you don't, it'll ask you if you have plans to implement board level oversight of climate related issues. So it starts off asking about board level oversight, then it moves to a step below. So it asks then day to day, who is the highest level of management within your organization on climate related issues, be that, you know, the CEO, a committee, or maybe even just an energy manager, etc. But it'll ask day to day who's looking over climate related issues in your organization, and it'll ask you to put in more details about that. And then the last piece in the governance section is about incentives. So do you have any incentives, monetary or non-monetary, for any of your employees that is linked to climate related issues and performance? So the next section then is the risks and opportunity section. I will caveat this by saying this is probably the most onerous section in the questionnaire, but equally it's probably one of the ones that most companies will get the most value out of disclosing and filling out. So the risk and opportunity section, it starts off by asking about your overall risk processes. So, and if climate related risks and processes is integrated into your overall risk management processes. It'll then ask you to give details on your overall risk management and how climate related issues are linked to that. So it'll ask about what you define as short, medium and long-term time horizons. What's your overall definition in the company of substantial financial or strategic impact? How do you define that quantifiably? And the frequency that these issues are looked at. And then it'll ask you to detail your overall process on how you identify, assess and manage climate related risks. So the first part is really more so about your overall processes and risk management. It will also detail different risk types or climate related risk types, and if your organization has considered these different risk types. Risk types, they fall into two overarching categories. So you have transitional risks, which is as the world and the country moves towards a green economy, what's the risk that poses to your organization? And the other type of risk then is physical risks. So what are the physical risks that climate change poses to your business, be that change in temperature or maybe acute or extreme weather events that are increasing in frequency. So it'll detail some of those risk types and ask if your organization has considered those. The next part then in the risks and opportunities section is where it asks if your organization has indeed identified any climate-related risks and opportunities with the potential to have substantial financial or strategic impact on your business. So it'll ask you to disclose a few risks and a few opportunities if you've identified them for your organization. And it'll ask you to give levels of details on how this risk is a risk very specifically to your company. Have you been able to put actual financial numbers on the potential impact that the risk could have for your organization? And also how you're managing the risks and the costs related to those and examples related to those. So it's quite a detailed disclosure on your risks and opportunities. The next section then is the business strategy section. So this is the section where it asks how climate-related issues are integrated into your overall business strategy. It's asked if you have done a climate-related scenario analysis. And what climate-related scenario analysis is, for those of you who don't know, it's essentially assessing your organization within one of there's a number of scenarios out there, but you can choose scenarios laid out by someone, and you essentially put your organization in that scenario, and it helps you to assess and identify different climate-related risks as you move through that scenario. So if you've done that process, you can input the details of here and talk about how it's informed your business strategy. It'll also ask if you have a low carbon transition plan, and if this is brought up at AGM meetings. And then it'll ask how climate-related issues are integrated into your business objectives, your overall strategy, and your financial planning. So how it influences different elements of your financial planning. Next is the targets and performance section. So it starts off asking about your emission reduction targets. So if you have any absolute emission reduction targets or intensity targets, you would detail these here. If you have any science-based targets, etc., that would all be input here. It also asks then if you have any other key climate-related targets. So this might not be a target that's specifically ton of CO2 reductions, but it could be a target, maybe a supplier engagement target or something to that degree that is related to climate, or maybe an energy efficiency target. This would also be detailed here. Then it goes on to ask about your actual emission reduction initiatives. So it asks you if you have any emission reduction initiatives in place during the reporting year, and it'll ask you to give details on those essentially. And it does go into quite a bit of detail there in terms of investment, payback, etc. And then it'll also ask if you have any low carbon products, and if so, you can put details of that in there. So then we go into C5. So this is more so going into the actual disclosure of your emissions data. So the emissions methodology. So it'll start off just asking about the what standard or protocol did you use to do your overall footprint. So whether that was the GHG protocol, maybe it was the ISO 14064-1, maybe it was another standard or protocol. So you choose that, and then it'll also ask about your base years and your base year emissions. So the year that you're comparing the reporting year to, essentially, or years that you're comparing it to. C6 then is all about the emissions data. So you essentially input your scope 1 emissions, your scope 2 emissions. You also put in here if you have any exclusions for the first year, or not for the first year, if you have any exclusions for the reporting year. So maybe you're excluding certain sites, so you would input that in here to be transparent about that. You also then input your scope 3 emissions data in here. If you have any carbon emissions from biologically sequestered carbon, this is also input into here. And then the last part of this is about your emissions intensities. So it'll ask you to compare your emission intensity. So this is ton of CO2 per your revenue or per some other metric. It'll ask you to compare that in the reporting year to the previous year. You see if it's gone up or down, and it asks you to detail why it's gone up or down, essentially, and if you know the reason behind that. C7 then is emissions breakdown. So this is essentially just taking the overall scope 1, scope 2 data that you've already input, but just asking you to segregate it to break it down even further. So if you were able to break down your scope 1 emissions by greenhouse gas type, by country, business division, facility, activity, you would do that here. And same again with your scope 2 emissions, if you can break it down to that level of detail. You don't necessarily have to break it down by all of these, but as many as possible, essentially. And then the last piece of this is, again, the comparison piece. So it'll ask you to compare, previously asked you to compare your emissions intensity. In this section here, it now asks you to compare your absolute emissions, so just your total sum of emissions in the reporting year to the previous year. See where it's gone up or where it's gone down, and ask for more details on that if you know why it's gone up or gone down, and allocate it to specific reasons, essentially. C8 then is where it asks you to break down your energy further. So any what percentage of your total operational spend is on energy. For all of the fuels that you use, it'll ask you to break down the kilowatt hours consumed of those fuels, and what emission factors you use to calculate the emissions for those fuels. For electricity as well, it'll ask for a kilowatt hour breakdown of that. It'll ask here sources of renewable energy as well, and non-renewable energy, if you can break that down even further. If you use any heat or steam or cooling systems or anything, that would also be broken down here. C9 then is a space for additional metrics. So this questionnaire is essentially a climate change questionnaire, so it is very focused on obviously climate metrics and tons of CO2 specifically. But if your organization does collect any other kind of environmental data and you would like to input that in here, so say for example, you monitor your waste, or you monitor water, or you monitor anything else, biodiversity metrics, this is a space essentially where you can input those. C10 then is the verification section. So if you get your emissions third-party verified, and there's a number of different standards out there that you can get your emissions verified to. But if you get third-party verification of your emissions, you can input that here. And then if anything else in your questionnaire is verified by a third party or externally, you can also input that in here. So for example, if any of the information is shared or anything like that for reports. C11 is all around carbon pricing. So for anyone who is in, I guess, firstly, anyone who's in the regulatory space. So in the EU ETS, for example, you would input information on that in here. It also will ask about if you don't necessarily have to be in a regulatory space, but you may have developed your own internal carbon price in the organization, and you would detail that here if so. It'll ask for details on carbon taxes as well. And also if you've purchased any offsets or project-based carbon credits, as they put it here, you can input details of that in here. C12 then is the engagement section. So firstly, it asks about your climate-related engagement. So if you're engaging with suppliers or customers, it'll ask for details on that. What does the engagement look like? What are you trying to drive? What are your measures of success? And what impact are you having, essentially? So for suppliers and customers or any other partners or stakeholders, you can detail the engagement there. If you're engaging with public policymakers on climate-related issues, it'll ask you for information on that as well. If you're any kind of trade associations, it'll ask you about that and what their stance is on climate change, whether or not you agree with that stance. If you're funding any research organizations as well. And then the last piece in here is if you publish any information on your organization's response to climate change. So this can be sustainability reports, maybe it's just a website with your emissions, any kind of information that you publish externally can fall into that question there. C13 then is other land management. So this module only applies to certain sectors. So it only applies to those in the agricultural, commodities, food, beverage and tobacco, and then paper and forestry sectors. So if you're not in one of those sectors, this part of the questionnaire won't come up for you. But essentially what they're asking for here is the impact of your company's land management practices on land apart from climate. So any kind of biodiversity, soil, water or yield impacts you might be having, and also the impacts that your suppliers' land management practices may be having on the land. C14 is portfolio impact. And again, this module only comes up for anyone who's in the financial services sector. So if you're not in that sector, this module won't come up for you. But this module asks for a breakdown of your emissions of your portfolio. So it'll ask for the total emissions. It'll also ask for other metrics such as your weighted carbon, your carbon intensity, your carbon exposure of the portfolio. It'll ask if you can break down your portfolio emissions by asset classes, industry, country, but then also the actions that you're taking to try align your portfolio to a well below 2 degree future pathway. So if you are trying to encourage, if you know of your client or investees' business strategies on climate related issues, if you're trying to encourage them to take up science-based targets to keep within those pathways. And then the last module is the sign-off module. So this is essentially just the person who is signing off the questionnaire. The higher up in the organization, the better. If you can get the CEO to sign off, that's ideal. They don't necessarily have to be the one to click the button, and that's probably an important thing to say. So the main user is the one who is going to submit the questionnaire and sign it off. The CEO might have verbally signed off the questionnaire, and that's okay. They don't have to necessarily be the person to click the button and submit in order for them to have signed it off. And I'm going to just, oh, sorry, there's one more. Yeah, so the supply chain module. So this only applies if you're requested by a customer with the supply chain program. So if you haven't, again, this module wouldn't apply to you. But if you have, overall the questionnaire is the exact same, so or pretty much the same. So you would do the same questionnaire, but then this module would just be added on at the end if you're requested by a customer. And in the supply chain module, it'll ask you to allocate a portion of your emissions to the customer that's requested you to respond to the supply chain module, and you can do that by revenue, volume, whatever different way you would wish to do that. It'll ask if you have any feedback on challenges of allocating emissions to a customer, if you have any plans to develop your capabilities in order to get that emissions data. It'll also ask you about collaboration opportunities, your emission reduction initiatives, if any of those were driven by requesters. And then if you have information on your emissions at a product level, if you're able to break it down to a product level, it'll ask you to input that as well. And I'll just end on this before we go into the conversation portion of the training session today. But I know it's already been mentioned, but in your first year of responding, if you're requested by investors, you are able to respond to the minimum version of the questionnaire rather than the full version of the questionnaire. Also, possibly of interest to some companies, particularly those who are on the call who are self-selected, who are thinking of responding. If your organization is under a certain threshold of revenue, you do also have the option to respond to the minimum version of the questionnaire. But in terms of what's the key differences of the minimum versus the maximum version, largely the emissions data is the same. So the actual inputting of your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, etc. That largely remains the same. The real difference, I guess, is more so around the carbon strategy piece, and that's pared back quite a lot. So the governance, risks, opportunities, and business strategy, there's still questions around it, but it is pared back a bit for your organization. And then there's certain parts of the questionnaire that just aren't there at all in the minimum version as well. So just thought that may be useful to see the differences between the two. But yeah, I guess I guess just to reiterate that the minimum version isn't scored, and if you're requested by investors, you can only do the minimum version for the first year as well.
Yeah, that was a pretty phenomenal run through in 20 minutes, the whole CDP. I hope everybody was paying attention. Lots of great hints and tips there. A couple of very quick questions before I hand over to Gavin and Alan. There's a question about the base year. Can you revise your base year? And, you know, is it a good idea over time to revise it? The other question, which was obviously Ian is planning a very long response. He wants to know whether he should fill the whole box with the 2,400 characters or 3,000 characters, whether the box is there or not, or should we keep our answers concise and direct? Great question. Do you want to those two?
I mean, I guess in terms of the base year, yes, you can revise your base year if you would like. Yeah, so if it is the case you want to change it from 1 year to the next year, you can. In terms of the word count, I don't know if Gavin and Muriel have an opinion on this. I would say that you don't. It does give you a maximum you can input. That doesn't mean you have to fill in the 2,000 or 3,000 words. You're better off being more concise, but answering the question and giving the detail that CDP maybe want. You know, they have guidance documents on what they're looking for in the question. So you're better off giving an answer that just answers the question rather than you don't necessarily have to write an entire essay for every single question. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I mean, I think it's a bit like doing the Leaving Cert. I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of the person who is marking or scoring the questionnaire, the easier you make it for them to find the information that they can give you the points for, the quicker they'll get through it and the quicker you'll get the points. So if you provide them with huge amounts of information that are not exactly relevant to the question, then that's not very helpful. So it's not about volume, it's about concise and relevant answers.
One other quick comment is that we didn't cover the changes from last year because they're so minimum. There's really nothing very significant in terms of changes from last year in the questionnaire. So that's good to know for those of you, but also a common question that we get. Gavin and your guest, Alan
Yes.
Cawley from CISC. Over to you guys.
Indeed. So we're very fortunate today to have Alan Cawley, who's Sustainability Manager at John Sisk & Son. So when I think back to when we used to do these workshops in person, usually how it worked was that anyone who attended would sort of sit politely through all the technical detail that we delivered and they'd listen to it and everything else. But really what they wanted to do at the end was to talk to other companies and to find out their experience in responding, like how do they go about it? What were the problems? What were the issues? And that used to be the most lively debate in the in-person workshops. So we want to try and replicate a little bit of that today. So Alan has very kindly stuck his hand up in the air. In terms of, and I think we had it billed as a sort of a first-time responder. So it was really mainly around your response last year. So I suppose the first question is a very simple one in that, like, why did CISC decide to respond to CDP last year?
First of all, cheers. Thanks for having me today, Gavin. It's good to go through our experiences of CDP and first of all how it kind of came to light for us. Because we'd be down as a self-selected company, so we wouldn't have really been obliged to disclose under CDP. But I suppose last year there was there was changes within CISC, and we decided to publicly disclose under CDP. For the couple of years before that, we were asked by one of our clients to disclose, so we were doing that, and I suppose last year we were working on our 2030 sustainability roadmap, and we thought, all right, what better thing to do than publicly disclose under CDP and have that kind of as the first step, and then have a CDP target by 2022 to be an A-rated company. So that's where it kind of came from. We were having the internal discussions about it, and that's that was one of the things that did come up. Like CISC, we've had an energy management system as well. Like we're only one of a few construction companies that would have the 50,001. So look, we were measuring a lot of our carbon, our scope 1s and scope 2s, and also a lot of elements of our scope 3s. So we said, look, we have the information, but we might as well have it, in a place like CDP where it's there to see, a lot of our competitors as well, especially in the UK, will be disclosed under CDP. So kind of chose it as, we'd go for it in 2020 and publicly disclose.
Okay, and that's interesting. So, I mean, in terms of when, and if we just cast our mind back to what Grania went through, so you have the whole questionnaire there. I went through some of the more procedural bits. So when you'd gone through the, teeing it up and you were looking at all those sections, for you as an organization, like what were the like what were the most difficult pieces to tackle, and what, you know, or what did you find quite easy to do, you know, depending on your own sort of systems that you had in place?
Yeah, I suppose the wordier sections we found them the most difficult, looking at their kind of risks and opportunities, and you know, first of all, trying to identify them. Like we, through the energy management system, like we would have identified a lot of the areas, but you know, when we kind of first disclosed in 2018 the non-public disclosure, we, you know, trying to identify those, we found it quite difficult, and especially the time that we had to put aside. We, like the first year that we did it, and especially last year, we the amount of actual time you have to put in to actually get it down on paper, that's what we found the hardest. And I suppose you have to get inclusion from other stakeholders in the business as well, like some other functions. So had to, you know, my colleagues in the UK as well, they had to feed into it, because we did it as a whole kind of Ireland and the UK submission. The emission section, we found that actually okay, because we had a mechanism to actually, you know, record all that information. And also last year too was the first year that we got certified to ISO 40064, and that was through Clearstream Solutions, which was, you know, it was brilliant to get that done. It was a very tight time frame that we kind of requested, and we got it done the end of the day, and thanks to Gráinne and Brian for that. But I suppose, yeah, it's all about having the meetings early on, and with the right people within the business to get that information and to get the buy-in as well. So that they're kind of the main points there.
Okay, and just finally then, in terms of this year's response, are there any, just a couple of pointers as to how are you going to approach anything differently, or are you just going to try and, you know, get, as we all have ambitions to start these things earlier, but that never happens. But are there any sort of differences in the way you're going to approach it this year?
Yeah, there's a few. I suppose, again, we engaged with Clearstream Solutions to do a CDP gap analysis, just to see the areas in which we were, you know, which we were weak or lacking information. So that's already been conducted, so we kind of know those areas, and we put a better timeline together, just to get the information down on paper and get the right people review it at the right time. So it will give us time to put a good response together. I suppose last year that was, you know, it was, I won't say it was rushed, but if we gave a little bit more time to it, we possibly could have got a better score. Like we got a B- last year, which is, you know, we found that was quite good for the first time responder. And I suppose from that and through our roadmap and our targets, aiming for the, you know, an A-rated company by 2022, you know. But we have those timelines now put in place and the milestones to hit, just really to ensure that we have all the information there. And also, you know, we're going to get it reviewed as well, the response, you know, a few weeks before the actual submission, which is, you know, is also quite good. And I suppose last year as well, we didn't have CDO sign off for the CDP. So this year we've kind of factored in a bit of time, so they can review our submission as well, and you know, they have the final sign off. But I suppose with CDP as well, and within, to go back to our roadmap, we do have a theme on climate change. So, you know, all that will feed into our response as well, all those kind of targets that we have in place, and we want to be carbon neutral by 2030. So, you know, we've a lot of information that we can include in CDP and how we're going to achieve that. So every little, you know, bits of information like that will help in our submission. So yeah, it's we're on a good road at the moment. We have all the timelines and you know, the milestone dates in place. So, you know, the big ask.
Sounds like you're on top of it all, Alan, there, and a very high bar as well that you've set for yourself. So listen, thanks very much for that. I think those kind of insights in some ways are more valuable than some of the information we went through, because, you know, you talked about timelines, you talked about getting buy-in, you know, and planning, getting the buy-in and sign off from the CEO. And just those small little details, when you think of those early on, can make a big difference. So I'll hand back to you, Brian. Thanks, Alan.
All right, cheers.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. I should point out that obviously, as I said, Clearstream Solutions does offer support. CDP offers support themselves directly, and Muriel and the Responder Services team will be happy to help people also. And there are other service providers out there who can help you on the journey. I do suggest for the first time out, I would say this anyway, wouldn't I? But it's a relatively high bar, and it does help to talk if you wish and you want to speak to other responders. Certainly one of the things that the CDP Ireland network does is it can put you in contact with others who have responded before. And indeed, the steering committee also offers support. So please don't be lost. So there's a few questions coming in. So I'll just, good question here. This is a season of targets. And we heard last year, our theme was net zero, and we've a lot of talk now about science-based targets. So there's a question from Maurizio about the race to zero and how I guess I'll read the question. My question is, how does the Race to Zero initiative relate or differ from current CDP reporting presented here? And I guess it aligns very well. I don't know, Muriel, do you want to answer that, or?
Yeah, happy to do so. Just as a starting point, it's maybe good to mention that CDP is a founding partner of the Science-Based Target Initiative. And the Science-Based Target Initiative offers methodology for you to set emission reduction targets in line with science. The most ambitious target is a net zero target and a 1.5 degree aligned target. And you can commit to this target via the Business Ambition for 1.5 degree campaign. And this campaign automatically also puts you in the race to zero, so to say. So these two are linked to each other.
So is it a separate submission, or is it, yeah, so separate submission, yeah.
So either you can commit to the Science-Based Target Commitment Letter, or you can commit to the highest level of ambition via the Business Ambition for 1.5 degree campaign. So they're both commitment letters, but it's different levels of ambition, so to say. And with the highest level, you automatically also back the race to zero.
Yeah, I would say one of the things we're getting a lot of questions about, and maybe Gavin, you could touch on this, is the Science-Based Target Initiative, because we're getting a lot of requests for organizations, whether they're part of a pledge, let's say Business to Community pledge, or they're part of some other initiative that is effectively committing them to a science-based target. And maybe just to explain, obviously, the two steps in that process, the submission and after the, do you want to touch on that, Gavin?
Yeah, so yeah, there's an awful lot of people. I mean, you had one of your slides, Brian, that highlighted the increase in people setting a science-based target. I think just a couple of things that we're seeing with various companies is that you make the commitment, and then you've 24 months to basically do an analysis of your, if you haven't already done so, of your scope 1 and 2, and particularly scope 3. And then you have to submit your target, you know, within that time frame. So a lot of companies, if your scope 3 is more than 40%, you have to set a scope 3 target. So a lot of companies are now looking at doing an assessment of their scope 3 to see, because they don't have all that detail. So I think what we're finding anecdotally is that with the increase in the number of people seeking a science-based target, I think the engagement time is becoming longer. So submitting your target, getting it approved is taking longer. Specifically for CDP, there are questions around science-based targets, so you do get more points if you have submitted a target and if you have a target in place. So that's where it ties into that. But generally, yes, there's a huge increase in companies looking at this now and trying to figure it out and trying to figure out the direction they're going in.
Yeah, it's a common piece of feedback that we get from people who enter the CDP process with dread and fear, but actually find out that over the year or 2 or 3 that they get accustomed and used to it. that it's a very useful framework to address all of these new issues on climate change that are coming at us. So whether it's TCFD and measuring climate risk and opportunities, whether it's climate carbon pricing, whether it's target setting, whether it's scope 3 emissions, the CDP response and going through the CDP questionnaire and improving your score, like, and setting a target like Alan and CISC have done to improve your CDP score, really helps with all of that, because it aligns with all of the best practice frameworks out there. I think it's really interesting, Muriel, that you called out the biodiversity targets and metrics, because, you know, through the TNFD now we're seeing more interest from investors and customers in biodiversity. So I think CDP provides a very holistic network and I suppose range of services and questionnaires that can help any company, whatever stage you are on your journey, to get to grips with your climate, and in a way that's, you know, you can take it through the minimum questionnaire into the maximum. You don't get scored first year. There's a progression. So I see it as a journey. Any final last questions or comments? I think we're almost coming towards the end. Maybe I'm about to give you the biggest secret of all in terms of responding to CDP. Now, you're not to tell anyone, because this is a secret, but and it's the secret of success. And it basically is the fact that you can cog. It's like going to an exam. It's like being able to see everyone else's responses, because essentially, if you want to understand what best practice is, CDP, that's the great thing about this sustainability world, is we're all sharing our best practice. We're all sharing our journeys. So you can log on to the CDP site and see what best practice in responding and CDP and approaches to addressing climate change. So if you're in any way concerned, or you want to understand what the good ones are like, or maybe the not so good ones, go on there. You can download, I believe, at least 5 responses per individual, and you can look and see what best practice looks like in terms of CDP responders. So pick a few of your favorite A-listers or competitors. We've got 5 A-listers in Ireland, including Kingspan, ESB, and AIB, and others. So you can go on site, see what they're saying and what their responses are like. But you can also see what, you know, as I said, where some of the other good performers, or perhaps your customers are, customers and indeed competitors. Finally, next week, for those of you who have previously responded, or even maybe first-time responders who are particularly ambitious, we're hosting a more detailed session on the questionnaire next week, where we're actually going to look at techniques and tools to help you improve your score. We call it an advanced CDP reporting. There is a small fee for that session, but where we go through the questionnaire step by step. So if any of you are interested in doing that, there will be a link to the Eventbrite site here. But essentially, as I say, we go into a lot more detail on the questionnaire step by step, and in terms of focus on increasing your scores. So final thank yous. I want to thank Alan. It's always brave to come on and share your personal stories. And it was great to see that progression from supply chain into the main questionnaire. So I love the setting ambition for a CDPA score. No pressure, Alan. So thank you for that. From Muriel from CDP, Muriel's fantastic. She's been helping us for the last 12 months, and her responses are really quick. So please feel free either to reach out to Muriel directly, or through ourselves. We'll talk. We can get to Muriel, but she's been great support for us here in Ireland, and I know she has other countries, the Nordics as well. So thanks for that. Finally, to the own team, for Gavin and Gráinne in particular, and Gra in the background, who did a lot of the organization for this, but for Gráinne and Gavin, who obviously you could see the depth of experience and knowledge that's there collectively in the team. So if you have any questions, or we missed anything, please contact either myself, Gráinne, or Gavin, and we'd be delighted to help you. Even if it's an admin issue around CDP or anything like that. So look, good luck with your responses. I'll see some of you next week. Yeah, keep up the good work, and thanks for joining us. You will be sent out a summary of the slides and the recording. Thanks very much.